Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy is sponsored by Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with the intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Products include Westlaw, Practical Law, and Firm Central legal practice management software for small law firms. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the Greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is Life Illuminated. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan, acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. A Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology. Look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Welcome. Access to Democracy returns. Alan Miller with you. We have two guests, one of whom should be very familiar to us. Dane Schmit, President of Growth and Justice.
Great to be back.
And Matt Schmit,
Nice to
just
be
to
here, Alan.
confuse us,
That's right. This is going to be your challenge for the next 30 minutes.
who has been with Growth and Justice, what, for 2 years now?
Actually, about, 8 months now, actually.
And your
Feels
official...
like 2 years. We've done a lot.
Your official title is...
Policy and Projects Director.
Okay. Now, it's an interesting situation because Dane Schmit is probably one of the most revered names in journalism in the Twin Cities. And he's worked for the major papers, won all sorts of awards, served as over a decade as president of Growth and Justice, and he's decided that he wants to retire, although he's still going to stay active with them.
Yes, I want to clarify this.
Okay.
I'm going to be a very active, semi-retired President Emeritus, probably continue very actively with Growth and Justice, writing, being involved, helping the organization, and as a key advisor. And
Just
we've
slowing
got
down a little
presidential
bit.
search. Slowing down just a titch.
Yeah. And Matt, who was formerly a state senator, as a matter of fact, tell us, what is a think tank?
Well, I think in Minnesota we're fortunate to have a lot of organizations that contribute to the public good, and I think to have a left of center think tank that does a lot of research, amplifies good ideas around the state, that's a role that Growth and Justice plays. And I think there's a really important spot, the intersection of social progress and business competitiveness, that I think we can do a lot. We have done a lot, and we can do more in the years ahead. And that's what I think our contribution to Minnesota really
I would say
stands.
that you're more nonpartisan, though, than really radically left of center.
No, I think you try to find that sensible center, so to
Yeah.
speak, that middle ground.
That's absolutely true, Alan. We really have worked hard. We built a reputation and a kind of a niche in this state as business-minded progressives. We find common ground between business leadership in this state that says almost overwhelmingly, unanimously, that we do need to reduce racial, economic disparities, reduce inequality, lift families that are in poverty or losing ground economically, work on education, provide infrastructure, make sure that everyone's covered with health care. These are goals that business has.
Many things that we're going to talk about
Right.
hopefully this afternoon.
Right.
So When did you decide to join Growth and Justice, and take us through that procedure?
Well, I'll tell you, I was a free agent following the 2016 elections, and I knew for the last 10, 12 years now I've been working on a lot of issues in economic development and infrastructure, things that I think really contribute to the public good and the good life in Minnesota. And Dane and I had an opportunity to connect last December and talk about the vision for growth and justice, and also my interest in continuing to make a contribution in this space. And so I guess the pieces fell in place in the year that we're in, and we've been hard at work the last several months making progress.
Let me just add that Matt really had a great reputation in the Senate for working across the aisles, so that fit us perfectly.
Yes, he did.
He also had a strong reputation as a constructive, community building policy expert on issues affecting greater Minnesota.
And a go-getter.
Yes.
And geez, you guys are going to make me blush here. Come on.
And he had a special expertise in transportation and broadband, which is so crucial for greater Minnesota to have that high-speed internet access. They can't compete out there without that.
So we had a lot in common here.
Yes.
So how does Growth and Justice get funded?
Well, Dane may be better, suited to answer this question, but I think a lot of our contributions over the years have come from philanthropies, individual donors. It's very much, people-driven. Those who are interested in the public space of making a difference in Minnesota, willing to put some resources behind specific projects.
Dane, you were able to make it a go during a terrible time of recession here. And certainly things are a little bit different now, but
we've always gotten about 2/3 of our funding from philanthropic foundations, some of the blue chip foundations in the state, McKnight, Blandon, St. Paul Foundation, Minneapolis Foundation, because they really recognize that how our mission dovetails with their own. The idea that you've got to do charity, you've got to address the problems and the challenges and the needs of folks on the bottom half of the economy, and yet you want to do it in a way that builds economic growth and that serves business interests too.
But now we've had a great divide in this state, and I know that's one of the things that you have pointed yourself toward in terms of rural Minnesota, urban Minnesota, and for my money, the third one, which is suburban Minnesota, which has become a very big factor. How do you go about attacking that, getting it to blend, and making things applicable to all people?
Well, if I could just say quickly, I don't think Minnesota is going to compete in the 21st century if we're divided geographically and politically. I think it's really important for those who are interested in the public good to cut through some of the divisions that exist in our body politic. And so we saw in the 2016 election, you saw some pretty stark differences between metro and rural Minnesota. And I think it's important for us to recognize some of these divisions aren't new. They've been with us over a number of years, but it's important for us to understand what contributes to those divisions and talk through them, and try to move towards an agenda that brings Minnesotans together, investing in human capital and infrastructure. And Dane could probably say a little bit more about our One Minnesota vision, but that's really our unifying theme here moving forward with our project.
Well, I think that the 2016 election was really a wake-up call to a lot of people and a lot of politicians in Minnesota that, hey, things are not the same as they have been. People don't feel the same as they have felt. And when you see the Iron Range going Republican, that should be a wake-up call, not only to Democrats, but to everybody, that there are needs that are not being addressed.
Absolutely.
And I know that that's one of the things
Right.
that you pride yourself in trying to do, endeavoring to do.
Yeah, it's on everybody's lips. Public policy world everywhere is talking, it's all a buzz about this divide, and there's a lot of concern about rural resentment. Some of it we think is misplaced and not founded on the facts, and some of it is just plain deplorable. We don't need hatred and resentment and bigotry. We don't need to countenance that. But we do know that there is a real difference in the quality of life between Metro Minnesota and Greater Minnesota, that there is a gap between income and wealth Poverty rates are high. Multi-generational white poverty is a problem. Opioid addiction, big report out today. There are some real concerns out there, and those are legitimate, and that's what we have to address.
And we have to address them in a rational way
Right.
that really serves everybody. And I know that's what you try to do, but it's really a huge task.
It is a big, it is a great big bite that we've taken with this Minnesota Rural Equity Project. For one thing, the rural regions are different. The Iron Range is very different from southwestern Corn Belt. And yet there are enough commonalities, and there's there's enough work that's already been done by many great groups on some things that they all need in common, like broadband access,
Well,
transportation,
from the
and
governor-
mobility.
From the governor on down, he saw the need for broadband
Right.
back in the beginning of his term and put together the commission that looked into it. And yet I still see that there are underserved communities in terms of broadband here.
I'm getting a nudge from Dane, so I think this is my chance to chime in.
Hit that one.
You know, I think there's several points to be made here. One of which is that, you know, when Governor Dayton was campaigning originally for office almost 8 years ago, he had a vision of border-to-border broadband throughout the state of Minnesota. And I think it's important for us to recognize that campaign rhetoric matters, and what you see on the campaign trail and the promises you make do matter. And so after we took office in 2013, and some legislators had an interest in following up on those promises and investing in broadband, we created a nation-leading border-to-border broadband fund in Minnesota. It's contributed about $75 million in public funding, leveraged about twice that in private dollars to connect over 28,000 homes and businesses around the state of Minnesota. Has it solved the problem? No, but we've taken big steps forward, and I think we've got a roadmap for how to solve the problem, provided a future legislature and administration want to get serious about
And
addressing the issue.
provide the funds to do it.
Exactly, and I think it's important to note that this is an example of a challenge where the private sector, you know, is experiencing a market failure. There's, you know, population sparsity in greater Minnesota. You just don't have the business case to extend high-speed internet to every last business in farm and in household from the private sector. And therefore, you need a strong public-private partnership to get the job done, and that's where the state comes. And if done right, you can make a lot of winners out of stakeholders involved in the process.
To my way of thinking, one of the reasons that we have been most successful, I'm not talking about the program individually, but Egan TV, is the fact that we are a public-private partnership going into, I think, our 5th year now, where the city of Egan and Thomson Reuters got together, and they provide us with this beautiful state-of-the-art facility that enables us to sit here and broadcast not only on local TV, not only on Burnsville TV, but on YouTube and on websites and things like that. And it's gotten a lot of attention. And yet there are a lot of people in the state who feel left out.
Yeah.
And those are the people who either stayed home in 2016 or voted on a line that they've never voted before.
Yeah, there were. That is a great point about that you make there, Alan, about the public-spirited business interests in this state. We're very lucky to have that, and that's something that we try to capitalize on growth and justice, because a lot of the best, some of the best research, some of the best leadership on issues like acceptance of immigration and issues like transportation. The leadership is really coming from the business community. They are saying, build out the light rail system. They are telling rural Minnesota, do not resent the light rail system. That's good for Minnesota business, period.
And we've seen how successful light rail has been.
Exactly.
I think I've related to you on prior visits that at the time Governor Pawlenty, then a legislator, was in the legislature.
He was from Dakota County here, and he favored light rail.
I was pushing for it. He was against it. We had some interesting conversations.
And then he changed his mind.
He became governor, and he didn't change my mind. But what happened is when they cut the ribbon to sponsor, you know, to kick it off,
Right.
he got invited. Nobody invited me. The fact of the matter is, the blue line has been very successful. The green line is very successful.
Right.
And coming, hopefully, is the red line, and et cetera.
Right. we need a full build out of the transit system to be a first rate to compete. Similarly, we're trying to build a case for understanding and common ground in greater Minnesota. They don't call it transit out there, they call it mobility. The population in greater Minnesota is increasingly elderly. Folks can't drive, can't get around. They need rides places. And so there's options out there. There's actually flourishing public transit systems in a lot of metro cities. And we need to understand that commonality around transit and mobility, and that hopefully will supplant some of this resentment, which we think is actually not real, but is sort of calculated for pure political partisan gain.
And, you know, Alan, I'm not going to play political commentator here, but I think that folks today, more than ever, are looking for solutions, not Democratic answers or Republican, party line. They want solutions, and I think here's a few examples.
I know, for instance, that the number of farms is shrinking, or small farms are being bought up by big conglomerates, and yet talking to the farmers, they're the first ones that say, we need the immigrants to do the work on our property. And then you hear the politicians with this, to me, absurd attack on immigrants. As I said to another interviewee not long ago, 50 years from now, this country is going to look very different. And when I hear people talk about, let's give this country back to the white people who founded it. I mean, if you want to give it back to the Native Americans who we have screwed into the ground, who are relegated to second-class citizenship. That's who they forget that they're all immigrants.
If I could promote a great piece of academic study by Professor Ryan Allen at the Humphrey School. He had worked with the University Office of Economic Development State Chamber to put forward a study of the economic benefits of immigration in Minnesota. And I think you're absolutely right. If you talk to small business owners, if you talk to farmers, if you talk to chambers of commerce, they understand that Minnesota absolutely needs a healthy balance with immigration if we're going to compete in the 21st century. We just have too many jobs that are unfilled, and we need those people moving to Minnesota to contribute to our economy.
We're going to try to get Amazon here with 50,000 jobs, and we need people who are ready to fill those jobs. No question about it.
There's a front page story in the Star Tribune this week drawing attention to the business's very clear statement across the board around the need for more immigrants, not fewer, if we're going to sustain our economy. And they led off with a great example in rural Minnesota. Most of our dairy herd in this state now, and we are number 2 in dairy, I think, behind Wisconsin, really important sector of our ag industry. Most of that herd is maintained by Latinos, and they're an absolutely vital cog in our economy. And the dairy farmers are saying they're shut down if we go too far with this.
Well, it's the same on the turkey farms, and I think we're number 1 in the country, or certainly we were, in terms of turkey production.
Exactly.
The ones that get loose, I see walking through my backyard, but...
Those may be wild turkeys, but nonetheless, probably won't show up on your Thanksgiving table.
Here's an interesting fact. Study after study has shown that entrepreneurial activity is higher among immigrants than it is among the white native-born population. These folks are go-getters, and they are forming businesses, they are contributing to the economy, paying taxes, and we need to do everything we can to welcome them into our community.
Contrary to what we hear, the fact of the matter is the crime being committed by the government is the decision in terms of DACA, people who have been in this country all their lives, who are being threatened with deportation. Now, I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think that
I don't either.
Legislators are going to put their lives on the line when there is such a sentiment in the country. 70% of the country says those people are Americans. Leave
These are
them
kids
here.
who have never known any other country.
Right.
And they think of
It's
themselves as Americans.
Just ludicrous.
Right.
The morality of the issue aside, I think this is an example of where the campaign rhetoric meets reality, and we need these folks contributing to our economy and our way of life.
Right.
And so I'm hopeful. I hope that cooler heads prevail and that we find a path forward. And I think it speaks to a larger challenge on the national level for comprehensive immigration reform. We're kind of nibbling around the edges until we get serious about a 21st century approach to immigration.
And we really have to take an aggressive approach to public education. I mean, I love Bernie Sanders' suggestion that we have free education through college, at least through 2-year colleges. Look at Europe.
Yes.
And look
Canada.
at some of the countries over there that are running rings around us. And why? They have health care.
Right.
They have education.
Right.
We don't have health care, and we don't have that kind of education. Of course, Betsy DeVos is not the answer to public education, unfortunately.
One of the smartest things this country did, probably the smartest, was early on we provided free, universal public education up through the 12th grade. We were the first country to do that. And from that point on, we began to forge ahead of all the other nations in the world. Had the most educated workforce by far. Now we don't. Our higher ed attainment level is behind the European countries, and they make it an entitlement for people to get as much higher education as they can complete. They don't force you through to a 4-year degree if you can't do the work. But if you can do the work, you get to the resources to do that.
To me, that's a no-brainer.
Right.
Another thing, we have vast areas of Minnesota that lend themselves so to renewable energy.
Yes.
And while we have started, we're really just scratching the surface in terms of solar power, in terms of wind power. Other than the hot air that comes out of the Capitol, we have great resources upstate for wind power.
Well, not only that, but if you look at the technology that's out there, it has advanced so much in the last 5 to 10 years. It's economically competitive with any other alternative. And so I think Minnesota has to make a decision. Are we going to get ahead of this and create a competitive environment for being a leader, both in terms of innovation and in employment and in renewable energy, or are we going to follow the ball? And I think Minnesota, we still can catch up and be a leader if we get serious.
Well, I think we have a lot of catching up to do with what I see happening in other areas, and I think that we have to do it. I mean, I hate when it comes down to dollars all the time, because the fact of the matter is we have to spend money for these things if we want to progress, if we want to get ahead, if we want to be competitive, or more than competitive, if we want to be a leader like Minnesota was for traditionally decades, if not centuries.
It's not really spending. It is investment. It is absolutely an investment. It's spending is 3 vacations in Mexico for your family when maybe one would do. Putting money into renewable energy, putting money into education, putting money into healthcare is an actual investment.
And it's an investment that pays off. It's an investment that gives dividends. And why some politicians, I will say, people can't see it is beyond me, because they really have closed their minds.
Yes.
Another thing that we need is affordable housing. A lot of people in this state, and there's an article in the paper today about 2 slumlords who have been really depriving people of decent education. We need affordable education. We've got to make sure that we provide it.
Yeah, as Dane and I go around the state talking to groups and individuals about challenges of the day, and certainly during my time in the legislature, you heard this loud and clear, the different inputs for a community to be competitive and to thrive in the 21st century. And it used to be that the first thing a family would ask about when it moved to a community was, how are the public schools? And that may be true, but they also ask about broadband connectivity, they ask about childcare, they ask about affordable and workforce housing. And all of those and others contribute to what we consider a competitive environment for prosperity and growth. And so I think that's a theme of our project with this One Minnesota Rural Equity Project, is to focus in on the sorts of inputs that can make a community successful and thrive in the years ahead.
So we've really touched on some new important themes in this project here now. You mentioned housing. That will be part of it. Renewable energy will be a part of it. Child care is coming on. Child care shortage is severe
Absolutely.
in greater Minnesota. And another point I really want to make, Alan, is that all of these things are also needs in the suburbs and in the metro area as well. So this is not an agenda that is just for rural Minnesota that we're working on, but one that serves the entire state. These needs are common and universal.
Some areas just need it more than others,
Exactly.
and we have to be able to apportion that out so
Right.
that everybody is served.
And if I could make the point, I think something that we've heard in community after community is that folks aren't necessarily looking for the state for answers. I think there's a lot of good local initiatives that if given, whether it's resources or attention or time to mature, they can solve problems, whether it's in individual communities or across regions of the state. And that's one role that we like to play is amplifying those good ideas, being the glue that connects partnerships and collaborations together, and where capacity building leads to movement and a need for maybe a state partnership and funding, we want to be able to lead the way and point how that can work. And so I think it's a partnership between local initiatives and stakeholders, and also the state being interested in investing in capacity building and actually moving that ball if investment's needed down the road.
And that's where we're going. And I see we're running down to 2 minutes. One thing I wanted to ask, Dane, what's your proudest moment in your over decade of presidency of growth and justice?
Well, it's hard to pick one, but there was a moment a couple of years ago when we were in the office of a legislator who was the chair of the Education Committee, and we had been working for years on this cradle to career smart investments in Minnesota students framework. All of the things you do from early childhood all the way through to post-secondary completion. We'd done a really in-depth study, enlisted scholars from all over the country, and came up with 19 specific kinds of interventions or investments, everything from AVID, which is a program that serves low-income kids and gets them into higher ed, 19 different kinds of interventions. And so we had laid this out, cradle to career. We sat down with this legislator, and it was a rural legislator, and he basically had our report in front of him, and it was earmarked or dog-eared, and there were Post-it notes sticking out of it. He had basically was going to take this report and use it to build the world's best workforce education bill, and that became law. That was probably a crowning moment that made me so proud of what we've done and feel like it was having an effect.
And we have been talking with Dane Schmit, who has spent a lot of time with us here, a new visitor who will, I hope in the future, spend a lot of time with us, Matt Schmit. You've been watching Access to Democracy. These folks are from Growth and Justice, and they represent everything that Growth and Justice in Minnesota stands for. So thank you both.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you.